Welcome to the Wellness Abundance Podcast. I'm Melissa King, your podcast host, board-certified health and wellness coach, certified personal trainer, and founder of Wellness Abundance Coaching. I created this podcast to help women like you learn more about your body so you can age gracefully and navigate the different seasons of your life effortlessly. If you're a woman searching for answers to unexpected weight gain, intense PMS, chronic fatigue, fertility challenges, PCOS, brain fog, and more, this podcast is for you. We'll do a deep dive into all areas of women's health and connect with experts so you can get clarity on what's happening within your body. This will empower you to take control of your mindset on the natural aging process and create flexible lifestyle habits that work for you at any age. Now, grab your favorite glass of wine, cup of coffee, or mocktail, and enjoy the episode. Welcome back to the Wellness Abundance Podcast. I'm your host, Melissa King, and I'm so excited to have Adrienne Smith, author of The Hag blog on Substack, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Adrienne and I were introduced by a mutual friend, and I'm not going to say any more because I want Adrienne to just kind of share a little bit about her blog, why she started it, and then you'll understand a little bit more once she gets into it why I invited Adrienne onto the podcast. So welcome, Adrienne.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on here. I'm excited.
Yeah.
So the Hag Substack, well, I think in the broadest sense, I really wanted to just normalize discussion about perimenopause, about menopause, about women who are in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, just really enjoying the second half of their life. And those two things, it's not going to be exactly the same experience for everyone, but I think that historically there has been a real lack of interest and compassion and research about this part of life. Certainly on the medical side of things, there has not been a ton of research. I know that personally, when I started to have perimenopausal symptoms, it was definitely downplayed by my doctors or downplayed or dismissed. And that was a theme that I saw coming up over and over again with a lot of my friends, with a lot of my similar age, like my sisters and my cousins. And it was really frustrating because, all of us, we are all accustomed to being able to feel more of a sense of control over our circumstances, I guess. And it's really tough when something happens that's not only out of your control, but also there just seems to be so little known about it. So you can't even be like, okay, I'm going to put together a plan. And so this is my plan, I guess, to kind of help myself and other people who are experiencing similar things. And one of the most important steps, I think, is just making it not a taboo topic, or not a topic where people kind of roll their eyes and they're like, oh, the hot flashes. I mean, it's slightly more complicated. Yeah. And it encompasses a lot more of your life. So that has been my purpose. My inspiration is just normalizing that, giving people a sense of solidarity. Like, you're not alone when you have symptoms that aren't just hot flashes. Like, I get cold all the time. Like, it doesn't matter what the temperature is in the room. I'm often just really cold. And that's part of the way your brain regulates temperature is being affected by this transition. And sometimes I get cold-like symptoms, and, it's not just, oh, my menstruation is uneven, or, oh, I keep sweating in this really comical, like Kathy way. It's a lot of stuff. It's brain fog. It's intensified emotions. I mean, like, your hormones are undergoing like a fascinating and kind of upsetting journey. And that should be taken seriously, but you can also greet it with humor. Like a lot of things, if you don't laugh through things, you can cry through them. So sometimes I choose the former rather than the latter. And I just want to provide a space for other people to be able to laugh and or cry. So inform, entertain, normalize. That's my goal with Hag.
Oh my gosh, I love that. And this is so, okay, so now, if you're listening to this, which obviously you are, you kind of have a better understanding as to why I invited Adrienne onto the podcast when I heard about her blog, because this is my whole thing too. Like, I've completely kind of done a revamp with my business and my program, my 12-week program, and how I work with women specifically, like when I train them, because I experienced the same thing. So like 3 years ago, I was like eating the same way, exercising the same way, and then all of a sudden throughout the month, I'd feel like my clothes were a little tighter or they were a little looser. And I was like, what is happening right now? I don't understand this. Like, I'm a pretty educated woman on nutrition and fitness because I've been studying this for so long. But I was like, what is going on? Like, this is so weird. I don't understand this. So I started doing my own research too. And it was hard to find. It was hard to find. I did find one woman, Dr. Sarah Gottfried, who I was familiar with. I bought her book, The Hormone Cure. They answered a lot of questions. But so I'm really excited that you have chosen to write this blog and really just normalize it, because oftentimes as women, it could be very frustrating when we don't know what's happening. And so, one thing that I'm really passionate about right now with women's health is helping women understand their bodies better, whether they're in their reproductive years. So really understanding their cycle, like eating with your cycle and working out with your cycle is actually a thing. And it makes a big difference. But then you get into your late 30s, into your 40s, and then not only like if you still have a cycle, so you're still menstruating, then you have these other symptoms going on, like brain fog,
Exactly.
hot flashes. And I did read a couple weeks ago about cold flushes. That's actually a thing too with perimenopause and menopause. And I had no clue, which, okay, it's not always fun. Sometimes I'm cold too. And my husband's like burning up, like, oh my gosh, I need to just like rip all the blankets off me. And I'm like, okay, just give them to me because I need them right now. But I just, it's just like, it's just so refreshing to know that, because first of all, women's bodies have not been researched ever, almost. We're just compared to small men.
No.
And that's why I'm so excited to learn all this,
Same.
So anyway, so thank you for starting this blog and adding some humor to it, because what else are we going to do?
Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, you touched on some stuff. I was curious.
Mm-hmm.
What are, like, let's say, two things that you really wish all women knew more about their bodies? Let's say women in the perimenopausal stage. Like, what do you think are two things that you've learned in your own business and education that you'd love to really get out there?
Well, number one would be to embrace it. And this whole anti-aging thing, I used to be all about that. Like, oh, I want all the anti-aging skincare products. I want to anti-age. When I'm 45, I want to look 25. And I'm like,
I feel that.
And I get it. I get that idea and that fantasy, but the reality is we're not 25 anymore. And really just, learning how to be okay with it and understanding it, and learning how to navigate it. So one big perimenopausal symptom that I've been experiencing like the last year is brain fog. I will just totally blank on things, like this easiest thing that I could normally just think of in an instant. It takes me like 30 minutes. I have to sit there and be like, what?
I know.
What? I opened a web browser tab to do something and I can't remember what was in my brain 10 seconds ago. Like,
yeah, you're like, why am I upstairs? I just have
yeah,
to go around and Post-its everywhere. Because, yeah.
exactly. Exactly. And and really just learn how to laugh at yourself in a way too. I was very frustrated at first because I'd be like, oh, I don't have time for this. I need to be productive. I don't have time to lose my mind because I don't have time to look for it. And
Yeah.
yes. So definitely learning how to embrace it. And I don't know, I think that's what learning how to embrace it and then also educating yourself on it
Mm-hmm.
and learning how to understand it. And under like a subtopic of learning how to understand it, one big way to do that is to track your cycle.
Yeah.
And kind of, when you get into the perimenopause phase, you could have like a normal, cycle every 25 to 35 days. That's considered the norm. But the flow could be different. Your mood swings could be different. Your cravings could be different. You could have breast tenderness 1 month. You could not have it
Yes.
for several months. And that's something I noticed. And that's like, the subtopic of understanding your body is to track your cycle and see like, what's it doing? What's
Yes.
happening?
Melissa, is so powerful to track your cycle. I mean, I
Yes.
know that there's like a lot of like centuries, thousands of years worth of stigma surrounding menstruation, but it is a thing that is both almost every woman experiences. Obviously, not every woman does, but most women experience it. And yet it is unique to you. And understanding your own body, like your body will give you signals and
Mm-hmm.
you know how to interpret them. I like to think of my relationship with my doctor. Obviously, she's the medical expert. I'm not going to set my own broken arm. You know what I mean? But
Mm-hmm.
I have the lived experience. And so
Yeah.
together, we're working together to find what is optimal for my body. And it would be silly for me to assume that I knew everything she did. Like my background is in editing, not medicine, but it would be silly for
Mm-hmm.
her to assume that she is able to know all the things that I know by existing in my body. And the best way to be a helpful partner in that relationship is to understand your body's patterns. And they're not always going to be the same. So 100% yes. I also strongly advocate for women to track their cycles, like, and not just today I bled, but I mean, understand what symptoms are happening when. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
as much as I knew, because I used to do pharmaceutical reporting and stuff, and I knew that scientific research studies, like for drugs or anything else, were not required to have any female subjects at all until like 1993. And it wasn't even,
Oh my
and then
gosh.
it was, I think, then it was like a suggestion, and it wasn't,
Oh geez.
it was like definitely in our lifetime that they were required to. Although
Mm.
now I don't know if that's still going to be the case going forward, but it is very recent. And so I knew this in sort of a, things in an intellectual way, and you feel, a sense of outrage, like another example of misogyny, but it isn't necessarily quite as visceral until you experience it. Like I have kids, and it wasn't until that whole experience. But in terms of menstruation, when you are done having the kid, they tell you everything goes back to normal. And it's like, well, first of all, normal is like not a very specific scientific term. But also, you like nothing ever went back to normal for me. I mean, like, even if I had chosen normal to be what happened in my 20s, it never went back to pre pregnancy ever. And it was very different after one child, and it was different in a different way after my second child. And so it just made me realize, like, what the fuck? Like, nobody
Yes.
knows anything. You know what I mean? Like, they don't have all this data where they're like, things change. They're just like, I guess, what is that even? Anecdotal data? Like, it's
Yeah.
not, it doesn't feel like robust, research is backing this up with like rigorous studies. I think it is very much, it struck me strongly as wishful thinking. Like, I don't want to deal with your hysteria over whether you may or may not have like a differently shaped vagina or different menstruation, or your hair might be different. Like I had curly hair for a while after one of my kids because the hormones actually can affect the hair follicles, which certainly no doctor ever mentioned to me. And yeah, it just made me realize like we need the medical community to be behind us, but also since we're not there yet, we really do have to do our best to be educated in a very grounded way. And it feels very unfair. But yeah, I think that the best way to set yourself up for a perimenopause that is not 100% miserable is, as you say, learning to accept things and being as educated as possible about your own body so that you know when things are changing and you don't just have unsubstantiated feelings or you're counting on your doctor to do it for you, which they're not. So you need to take charge of that. And yeah, I feel that it's very empowering. And I also love what you said about really accepting things. I kind of have tried to embrace the second half of my life as the fuck it era because
oh my gosh, yes. Okay,
yes.
I want to talk more about that when you're done, okay? Because there's something I read in Dr. Sarah Gottfried's book that really stood out to me too. But continue.
Well, I think I'm not alone as a woman in spending a huge amount of my life um, anticipating and adapting to, adjusting to other people's desires and emotions. And it's really hard not to do that. And you also do, as a human being, want to be considerate of the people around you. I just think it can go a little too far in the other direction toward self-abnegation almost, or like, I think you can both genuinely not give yourself the time to do the things that you want, and also you can use fulfilling other people's wants and desires as an excuse not to be brave enough to do your own things. And both things can be true at the same time. I definitely know that's been the case with me. So I have really tried to, it sounds very basic, but it can be surprisingly revelatory depending on where you're coming to this from. But just ask yourself when you're about to do something, what is your motivation for doing it? Like if you are not going on a trip for yourself, like, is it that you're genuinely too busy, that things are really blowing up at work and like your career is at risk? Or is it that you feel like someone else in the household might need you and you're like already borrowing guilt from the future and that's preventing you from doing something? I mean, I definitely have done that in the past. And so I've tried to frame my own desires as being just as valid as other people's. So I'm not saying be a selfish monster, completely ignore your family. This era is all about you. I'm saying try to value your own desires just as much as you value other people's. Maybe more some days. You're the only person living in there. So
yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Oh, I love everything you just said, and I agree with all of it. So when I was reading Dr. Sarah Gottfried's book, The Hormone Cure, I mean, it's a thick book. If you geek out on science, I highly recommend it. If you don't worry about it. Just ask me questions because I've read it all, and I geek out on that stuff myself. But she actually talks about that in there when we get to our 40s, for for a lot of women, depending on if you had kids in your, like my sister had my oldest nephew when she was 27. And then my other nephew, my youngest nephew, oh gosh, I think she was like 30. So they're like 3 years apart. So now that she's in her late 40s, sorry, Heather, I'm aging you, but it's okay. We're aging together, even though I'm behind you. Anyways, she's, most women are at that point when they hit perimenopause where their kids are grown up, or at least in their teenage years, where they're pretty much independent. So biologically, like, women are like that, like, fuck this shit. I'm paying attention to me, you know? But that can also change these days because I know a lot of people nowadays have kids later in life. So they may have little ones, you know, they may be in their mid 40s and have kids in preschool, you know, you never know. But, you know, and I personally don't have children, but I kind of feel like that where I'm at in my life, where I'm like, with things like, you know, I recently left my full-time job to grow my business full time because I got to a point where I was just stressed out all the time. And I was like, what am I doing with my life? Like, I'm helping someone else build their business when I have this huge passion for helping women. Why am I not doing this for me? You know, so I eventually, because I tend to be a people pleaser, so I eventually, you know, with the full support of my husband behind me, got the courage to leave that job and just pursue what I do full time. You know, getting this information out there via this podcast and through my programs and through my blog and everything. Because I'm like, you know what? This is it. I'm halfway through my life.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to waste any more of it. And it's also, you know, my husband and I got invited, like, it's like a month or so ago, to go out with some friends on a Sunday night. It was like 5 o'clock, you know, friend was in town, and we're like, oh man, it's Sunday night. We gotta work the next day. I don't want to do it. I told him, you can go if you want. You're welcome to, but I just don't feel like going. I just, you know, it's like you brought up the question of, ask yourself in the future, your future self, are you going to feel guilty, you know, or are these feelings of guilt coming to you, you know, from the future? You know, I was like, I'm going to feel guilty that I went and didn't stay home and just make dinner at home and have a lazy night at home with my husband. And we didn't go, and it felt great. It
Yeah.
feels so great to make that decision and just be like firm with it. So yes, definitely. But yeah, Dr. Sarah Gottfried does talk about that there is a biological need to really, for women to really just want to run away to the forest by themselves. I think that's the analogy that she used.
Yeah. I mean, like, that's the hag archetype for sure. And
Yeah.
I mean, and there is sense to that concept of withdrawing from society, because I think most women, whether you believe this about yourself or not, like whether or not you consciously tell yourself, my value is in my appearance, I don't think you can be raised as a woman in the United States and not have internalized that to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not that's like, you know, if you were to list things you like about yourself, whether or not, you know, your physical appearance is on that list at all, you have been given those messages in every medium imaginable for so long that you can't not have feelings about it. Whether you
Yes.
buy into it or not, that's going to be different for everybody. But I think it's impossible not to have feelings about it. And I think it can be really tough if you have bought into it. And then you find that suddenly this thing that felt like you were getting validation for all the time, you're suddenly not getting any validation for. You're, you know, young looking appearance, you're like conventionally attractive to the patriarchy experience, like you're not having that anymore. And that's tough. And I think if you thought your whole life that you didn't buy into it, and then you realize when you're, you know, past your prime as the 25-year-old female ideal, that like, shit, maybe I did have more invested in that than I realized, right? Like maybe I did get some sense of validation from my appearance in a way that I wasn't consciously recognizing. So I think that there can be a sense of wanting to withdraw from society, right? And to go out into the woods in a sense, because you are learning how to redefine yourself without that toxic validation. And so you have to redefine what you find attractive, what you find desirable. Like you can't have that forever young kind of appearance. And you know, you don't want your brain to be forever young. And it's only fair that like you're working smarter, right? When you get older, you're like, you're not being so you're not being such a spendthrift with your health. You're thinking things like, I've really got to focus on building bone density instead of doing cardio to be thin, because your object is no longer this impossible ideal. It's living long enough in a way that's healthy to really enjoy the second half of your life. But it's very hard. And going back to what we said earlier about how the journey to change always starts mentally. You have to be mentally and emotionally on the path. Your body, in cases like this, I think, actually acts last. The actual physical actions are the last step. Like, all the work beforehand is mental and emotional. And so, you know, I find this to be true. Like, this isn't something that I've completely conquered and I'm fine with. And I'm like, well, I've reached this enlightenment. I don't care anymore about what I look like. I never think about being attractive. I never worry about this. That's not true at all. Like, I am definitely struggling with this myself, but that's part of the front end work. It's putting the work in now to reframe things and to figure out what I want and to figure out who I am in this way that is more focused on things that are lasting and not so temporal, maybe. I mean, it sounds very abstract. And I think you can definitely start small. Like, it doesn't have to be these enormous sweeping emotional shifts. So yeah, I do think that the fuck it era can be really hard for women in early perimenopause, because you're just coming off that era of the patriarchy validating you for looking young. It's like, has nothing to do with you. So you're kind of like, there's like almost an aspect of those cartoon characters who like cling to the door frame when they're like, don't take me out yet. So you do have some sense of resistance to that. But at the same time, you know where you're going, but it's tough. Like, you weren't there yet. So it's not like you're at this point where you're like, I've been outside the patriarchal ideal for 20 years. I've had time to like come to terms with who I am, reframe my way of thinking about things. Like, I think in early perimenopause, you're kind of like, I see where I'm going. I'm trying to get excited about it, but it's, you know, like maybe not quite there yet. I mean, like, that's certainly where I am, is still in that transition. Like, it's liberating and amazing, but I think it can be scary and intimidating, and I think that's okay too. I think complicated feelings are inevitable, and there's something that you can definitely share a sense of solidarity with other people about. You know, you're not alone feeling complicated. You know, you're not alone wanting to feel desirable in the way that you are accustomed to feeling desirable. It's okay to still want that and to be sad that you can't have it anymore. I think the real trick is, as you say, enough self-awareness to understand the path to acceptance for you. And I don't mean that in a sad way, but you're like, oh, I just have to accept that, you know, now I'm worthless because, you know, I'm not desirable in this like very specific, unrealistic way. I think it's more like you're accepting that you can have something different and better, but it might not be the thing you always thought you wanted. And being okay with that is a journey that I am on.
Yes. A lot of my work with my clients, you know, not as much with my personal training clients. There's some mindset work with that as well, you know, as we're working together a little bit during our training sessions. Just by me asking questions and getting feedback and, you know, asking, how are you feeling today? You know, before the workout, how are you feeling? Oh, well, you know, I feel kind of tired. I didn't really sleep well because of my kid was up, or, you know, I started my period yesterday or this morning, and I'm just like, oh, I feel crampy and bloated and just icky, you know, so really kind of, you know, being aware of that, but also, you know, kind of also helping them to either kind of work through it or learn when to just call it. Be like, you know what, I'm done. I'm not going to work out today, and that's okay. So really, and then also, so with my 12 weeks effortless weight loss program, the very first module is all about getting your mindset set up. And it takes time. It takes time. You know, this is just the first module, and the exercise I have my clients go through, not a physical exercise, like a mental exercise, really figuring out like, what do you want? What's your why? Why are you doing this? And having that conversation with them, giving them an opportunity to do it on their own, and then, just continuing to talk about it so they can, get in the right mindset, because it's hard when
Yeah.
you're like you mentioned, the women who are in early menopause, they might not quite be on board with accepting it. They're just like, I don't know. I'm not too
Yeah.
sure about this. I understand the importance of it, but I'm not sure I'm completely on board with it. And like you said, that's totally okay, you know. But really kind of getting in that mindset of being okay with not being okay with it too is okay. Because one thing I hear a lot, being when people tell me I'm a health and fitness coach, they always, not always, but a lot of people, more than I expect, like kind of like justify their nutrition and fitness choices. Oh, well, I did this and I did that. Like, hey, no judgment. Whatever works for you, is it's your life, and you have to do what works best for you. But it's very interesting. So really kind of also kind of teaching my clients to, think for themselves, and don't let other people judge them for their choices, and yeah, but just mindset. And some of my clients come in to my program, just, specifically my 12 weeks effortless weight loss health coaching program, thinking I'm going to create a specific nutrition plan. We're going to talk about food and sleep and exercise the entire time. To be honest with you, we actually have very few conversations about nutrition, exercise, and sleep. A lot of that's education in my program through the app, but it's the reason why people have a hard time changing and accepting it is because they don't have an outlet to really talk about this stuff and talk about their feelings and kind of work through them. Like you mentioned, I can't remember if you mentioned it after I hit record, but I know you and I have chatted about this, but really just kind of being part of a community, however many are in that community, a community of support that's like, hey, I hear you. I know, I understand what you're going through because I'm going through something similar. And let's talk about it and normalize it and not make it taboo when we have a crying fit.
Yeah.
We don't know why, because we don't
Yeah.
know why. Just like, it happened to me just like last week, and part of, it could be where I was in my cycle, but I just came home from work and just felt like the world was crumbling around me. And my husband is so sweet. He just knows to just roll with it. And he just does his best to support me. I'll cook dinner, I'll clean, I'll do whatever you need me to do so you can relax. I woke up the next day feeling so much better.
Yeah, I know it.
And
Yeah. And I actually have written about this too, like whether it's, perimenopause really can feel like such a mind fuck, because you're like,
mm-hmm.
is it a hormonal symptom? Is it the world? Is it my own stuff? You know what I mean? And in the past, and when you think about it too, it's such a small amount of time that you're not undergoing. I mean, especially if you decide to be pregnant, like you come off puberty, you have a few years, and then you're dealing with pregnancy, which is its own like tsunami of hormonal experiences. And then, you really are counting on these relatively small intervals to define what normalcy is, right? And yeah, I just think it just is really important, as you say, to take what you're feeling and not attribute it to being silly or like something that should be quashed. Like, it's hard because part of you wants to be like, everything bad that happens to me is perimenopause, or you want to be like, everything bad that happens to me is because there's so much ambient anxiety in the world right now. But I don't know, just being open to how you're feeling and accepting that it could be one, two, three, or all three, and having a community around you. Yeah, that is likely the healthiest way to go through life. Absolutely. Yeah. The normalization instead of the, I guess I was looking for another Asian word, but instead of burying things, it's better to share them, right? I mean, those adages
Mm-hmm.
are so old, like burdens shared are burdens halved. Like this is,
Mm-hmm.
ancient human psychology and socialization. Like, yeah, it's better to be in a community that understands what you're going through. And it's better for all members of the community to understand also what you're going to. Like,
Yes.
I read that in the UK, there's a section on menopause and reproductive health, which was like a testament to how weird things are just in general surrounding women's health. And I was like, wow, what a novel idea that they would have, people in puberty learn about menopause. Like, why wouldn't they? I mean, why
Yes.
wouldn't they learn about the entire life cycle? Like they learn
Mm-hmm.
about life cycles of everything else. It makes total sense that you would learn about, fertility is happening, fertility is ending. Like this is a very reasonable thing to
Yes.
learn about.
Yes, exactly. And that's why, I've done a couple workshops. I did one a couple years ago, or about a year and a half ago, about um, nutrition with your cycle. And I had one of my friends who came, she's in her mid 40s. She didn't even know anything she didn't know about the hormone fluctuation, like when you ovulate, at what point in your cycle. And she didn't know any of that. And she's in her mid 40s. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And it was a big eye opener for me. Like, wow. I mean, it's hard for me when I share this. I actually just talked about it today with a fitness client of mine. We were talking about an injury, and I said, well, she has since recovered, from this minor injury. Thankfully, it was nothing serious, but we got to talking about it, and she's like, yeah, I think I know what happened. I think I know why it happened. And then I was like, oh, well, where were you in your cycle? Because when you're ovulating, you can, you have all this energy. Your hormones are super high because your body's like, all right, we're gonna make a baby. Let's do this.
Yes.
We got this. Okay, we're gonna
Yeah.
do this. We're gonna grow another human. Everyone, all hands on deck. So you get
Yeah.
excited and you feel a surge of energy and you really want to
Yeah.
just like do these intense hard workouts. But then your body also is more prone to injury
Hmm.
because of the relaxin hormone, which is the hormone that pregnant women get more of,
Yes.
so they can actually give birth to
Yeah.
their little ones. And it's interesting, just a light bulb went on in her head and she's like, oh my gosh, wow. I'm like, yeah, it's amazing. This is why it's super important to, know your body, because it gives you, feedback, and it really kind of guides you on what to eat, how to work out, how intense should your workout be, and there is some gray area. Nothing is black and white. Just to be
Yeah.
perfectly clear, these hormone fluctuations, they're all textbook, but really kind of paying attention to it and really just, if there are times, especially in perimenopause when your cycle's maybe a little bit off, like say you're having heavier flow than normal, um, if you don't feel like working out, don't do it, you know, because I don't know about other women, but man, when that flow is heavy, I have zero energy. I barely even want to go for a walk around the block.
Yeah.
And that is not like me. I like to move. I like to be doing stuff. It's rare that I can just lay around all day and sit on the couch. I'm not like that. I like to be moving, but man, days like that, I'm like, I don't want to do anything. I have no energy, no brain
Yeah.
power. I don't want to work. I don't want to do anything. I don't have any energy to do anything. And it could be because of the loss of iron. Loss of iron just zaps your energy like that. So really just, that's another reason why I'm a big proponent of tracking your cycle and your symptoms and just really kind of knowing, because as women, we tend to be, well, I'm speaking for the general population, but which maybe I shouldn't be, but as a woman, I'll feel guilty, like, oh, I don't feel like working out today. And I probably shouldn't be working out. But then I have all these guilty conversations
Yeah.
in my head,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I like that's definitely part of our culture at large, I would say.
hmm
The however it's been termed over the years, Puritan work ethic, et cetera, it is definitely in the public consciousness. I think that idea that if you are not, I mean, it's like if you take time off to have kids, then you have this gap on your resume.
mm
I mean, what were you doing then? You were contributing to society, but
hmm
you often have to account for it. And when you think about it, you're kind of like, but why do I need to account for working every
Yes.
single month and week of every single year since I entered the workforce? Like, why is that a sign of morality? Question mark, ethics? Like, I don't know what that's meant to do. Like, yeah, and I think that that is definitely something that all of us internalize as well. This idea that we should be doing things because if we don't, then it's somehow a negative reflection on ourselves. And, I think that is a genderless kind of pressure that we all put on ourselves. But I think, as you say, because of the way women are socialized, I think it does manifest as guilt a lot of the time.
hmm
And, we feel that when we're taking our health seriously, it's in fact making an excuse rather than acknowledging that your body is not going to perform to the same level every single day because it's not the same body every single day. Like your energy levels and your hormone levels and your, like, what is in your blood, it's different every day. So why would your
hmm
expectations be identical every single day? So yeah, I think that's another mindset thing where it is something I aim to do in this part of my life as I re-examine a lot of my expectations for myself. And I would try to make my expectations for myself kinder and more imaginative and less focused on shoulds and less focused on expectations that were perhaps set up for me instead of my being an active participant with
mm
them.
Yes. hmm Yes. Uh, in the first module in my program, when I talk about mindset, I uh, talk about being the leading lady in your own life. And I'm actually just working on a blog post, just writing a blog post today, and I actually talked about that. To really, set up your own expectations. Don't listen to what other people want you to do, whether it be friends, family members, society, and I love that you mentioned, when women do get pregnant and then they have the baby and there is that gap in their resume, you know, or they just decide once they're done with maternity leave, I don't want to go back to work. I don't want to go back to the job that I was at before I had this baby. I want to be home, you know, and then, it's, there's could be some guilt too along that. Well, I'm not bringing in any income. And it's
Yes.
like, well, you're also keeping a human being alive that you made, which is
No,
huge. That's a
absolutely. I mean,
huge,
it is. And obviously somebody does that work. If
yes,
you decide to go back to work, it doesn't mean that your baby raises itself. Someone
right.
always has to do that work. That is non-negotiable work. Like once the baby's in the world, someone is taking care of it.
Yeah.
And that it's a shame that that work has been so devalued. And
Yeah.
I I don't know. I wish it were not that way, because I think that it just adds to a lot of guilt that all parents have, that they're somehow not contributing, or that their work is valueless. And yeah, I mean, statistically, it hits women more than any other,
Mhm.
uh, any other gender parent. But um, it's, gosh, it's just something that upsets me every time I think about it, because it's such hard work. It's such
I'm
hard work.
sure.
And
Yeah.
it's amazing to me how devalued it is.
Yeah.
How many people who are pregnant and leave their job get told, either directly or indirectly, that they're taking a vacation of some kind. It just speaks to the fundamental lack of understanding about how difficult that work is. So it's difficult work that I wish were more fairly compensated, or at least given more respect by society in general, because it's vital work. So yeah, there's that. And then there's that second half, which is, my personal experience with resume gaps have to do with having kids, but that's not the case for everyone. And I think it
Hmm.
speaks to the larger issue of our work ethic forward culture. And yeah, I think it's worth it to consider, like, why we object to that so strongly.
Yeah. My husband has taken, he's been with his company for 25 years, since 1999. So going on 26, but he took two sabbaticals. And people, give him a hard time about it, mostly jokingly, you know, but I know there's some people who they're just so judgmental of it. And I'm like, you know what? I actually, the second time we were together, but the first time he went on sabbatical, we had not met yet. And I was like, I really actually respect that a lot. That, people, just in general, like, they're so self aware that they know I need a mental break and I need to step back from what I'm doing and go do something else. And he came back twice, obviously, came back both times to the same company. But it's the same thing with women. If women want to go raise their kids until they're school age and a little bit more independent. I mean, my mom was a stay at home mom. And, looking back, my dad traveled a lot with his job. And so there were periods of time where I'm sure she felt like a single mom because my dad was traveling so much. But, and looking back, it's like, um, I sometimes I did not like that she was always on the field trips, always chaperoning my field trips as a kid. But looking back, I'm like, wow, like, that was really cool that she had the ability to do that. And we lived very comfortably. It wasn't like we struggled, or at least I didn't see it. And I feel like, it's going back to the whole women who, like, kind of like a whole not giving a fuck. I feel like I'm kind of at that point in my life where it's not that I don't care. I do care. Just so everyone knows, I'm not going to shut myself out from the world. But my thing is, like, I'm sorry. I'm halfway through my life. I'm going to go on vacations. I'm going to quit my full-time job and pursue my passion to bring in an income and help women. I'm going to live the life I want to live, because I spent too many years just doing what society and what other people expected of me. So I'm just going to do it my way and just figure out how to navigate this. And I feel like, I obviously have a lot of friends who are, the same age, like our age, and
Mm-hmm.
they kind of feel the same way too, where they're just like, screw this.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that is a much better approach than feeling like you're basically in the grave when you have decades left. You know what I mean? Like, that's a
Yeah.
much better way to look at things, because you are much more aware of mortality when parts of your body are literally shutting down. Like obviously
Yeah.
ovaries are like packing up.
Yeah.
And you know,
They're slowly, one day at a
it's like,
time, they're
sort of,
packing one
we're
box
on
at
our
a
way
time.
out. Like our time here is almost done. So you know that you're not constantly looking toward like physical growth in necessarily the same way that you might have been before. So I think it's really wonderful to look toward mental growth and emotional growth, and like treating your body more as a vessel to sustain those like mental and emotional developments, and you know, less as your sole source of pride and joy. You know, like they're great, bodies are amazing, they support us through so much stuff, but like I don't know, we can look at mortality as being an impetus for wonderful change rather than a reason to be sad. You know,
Yes.
right now, I say this in my 40s, like obviously I'm not 89 and,
Yeah.
you know, looking at probably like statistically a much shorter lifespan, but I do think that a lot of people around 40 kind of have to come to terms with the fact that you can't sleep on a concrete floor in a sleeping bag anymore. Like you can't
Oh my gosh.
drink, you know, until 2 in the morning and be fine the next day. Like there are things that you used to take for granted that you can't take for granted anymore. And that, you know, that does require a certain reframing in your own mind about who you are and what you're capable of and like what your life is going to look like. But yeah, I am really enjoying focusing more on what things I can do that I will be proud of for myself in this second part of my life than I ever was in the first half. And that's been profound to me to think of it that way, not just like, you know, a slow trudge downhill to the pit, but instead like this second phase where things can be, you know, maybe radically different, certainly in terms of mindset. And that, yeah, there's a lot of joy and liberty in that, and also terror. But, you know, there's nothing so great that it doesn't become better through contrast, you know? Like there's no spring that couldn't be improved by having just come through winter. So
Yes.
I try to remind myself of that too.
Yes. Oh, that's a great analogy. Yeah. And and you know, one big message that I want to you know, share with just like my business and my mission as a health and fitness coach for women is to, you know, focus on the things that you can control. And you while you may not be able to completely get rid of these perimenopause or menopause symptoms, you may have hot flashes, you may have brain fog, you may still have heavy painful periods to some extent, but there is a way through lifestyle habits, you know, to mitigate it. You know, proper nutrition, focusing on whole foods, eliminating a lot of the processed foods, moving your body frequently. But that could look different than your 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
You know, I know you mentioned, I loved how you brought up, you know, you can't just go drinking till 2 in the morning like you did in your 20s. I can't tell you how many nights my girlfriends and I did that in our 20s. And looking back, I'm like, 2 drinks in, like once a week, and I'm like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah.
Not
Or
that
you a
I'm,
headache. Yeah.
yeah, not that I'm drunk or buzzed or anything like that, but I'm like, you know what? I think, and here's the thing too, the kicker, like my husband and I will start like Saturday or Sunday afternoon. If we want to have a cocktail at home, we'll start drinking at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So it doesn't affect our sleep when we go to bed at 9 p.m. on
Yes.
Saturday night.
No,
We're
it
always like,
does.
okay, it's 3 o'clock. If we have a drink now, if we have 2 drinks in the next 2 hours, we'll be done drinking by 5 o'clock. Okay, so then that gives us 4 hours that gives our bodies 4 hours to start metabolizing the alcohol and get rid of it. Okay, yes, let's do that. It's like, this is how we think. Back 20 years ago, 20, 25 years ago, I would be like, Ooh, okay. So the band starts at 10. We should probably start drinking at home at 9.
Oh,
Call a cab at 9:30, or whoever's the DD that night. We'll leave at 9:30. We'll get downtown. We'll already have a really pretty good buzz going on by the time the band starts. So we wanted to spend that much on booze. I mean, that's like how we thought, my girlfriends and I thought. That was our thought process, and that was our strategy. Like, let's
I
not start
mean,
drinking till 9 p.m. I'm like,
Melissa, I do. Let me say, I love how organized you are in every version of your life. Where, like, in your 20s, you were like, okay, let's work backward from this band to 10. How many drinks do I have to be at this optimum state of buzz by the time I get there? And now that you're in your 40s, you're like, okay, when do I want this alcohol to metabolize? I should start drinking at 3. Like, I love that this is your through line. You're
yes.
so organized. I feel like my life is would perhaps be a little bit more manageable if I were that organized.
Well, okay. Also, though, full disclaimer, just a reminder, I do geek out on all this science stuff, and also another thing with me is, are you familiar with the Holderness family?
Wait, that
They're,
sounds super familiar.
yeah, okay, so they're really big on YouTube. I highly recommend going to their YouTube channel. So they're like in their late 40s. So Kim, it's
Are they
Penn
the
and Kim.
ADHD? Did they
Yes,
write? Yes,
yes.
I do watch their stuff.
Okay, I
Yes.
love all of like well, I haven't watched all of them, but the perimenopause videos that they
Yes.
made with Kim just crack me up.
They're
And
great.
their video, I don't know when it was, but I discovered it like 3 or 4 years ago. It's called Mom's Got FOMS, Fear of Missing Sleep. Instead of FOMO,
Yes,
instead of
of
fear of
course.
missing out, it's
Yes.
fear of missing sleep.
Yes.
So my husband had my mother-in-law get that t-shirt for me for Christmas. So that's one of my
Aw.
pajama shirts
Yeah,
because that's
that's
me.
great.
Like these
Yeah.
days, like I've always been a really great sleeper, but obviously with the exception of being in my 20s and, staying out
Right.
till
And the
2
band
a.m.
starting at 10. Yeah, that probably
and the
wasn't the
band
sleep
starting at 10.
intensive part. Yeah.
Yeah. But nowadays I'm like, man, I 8:30 rolls around, I'm in bed, I got my Kindle out. But yeah, that's one thing is that's another thing kind of, I do geek out on all this stuff and all the science stuff and how the body works because I love learning about the body. So I am fully aware of like, how not just because of, the research I do on my own, but also just I know how my body responds. And that's another
Yeah.
aspect of me helping my clients is helping them to learn how their body works. Like I know if I have a drink at 8 o'clock at night, I'm not going to be able to get to sleep till like 11. Like I know
Yeah.
that. And I don't, at this point in my life, sleep is a priority, not getting my buzz on.
Yeah.
That's like the
No.
last thing.
Totally.
So,
And sleep is just, yeah, super important. And as you say, like everyone, everyone should know their body as well as they can. I totally agree
yeah,
because you can be the hardest core evangelist for whatever thing works for you. And, you can't even guarantee that 10% of the population will react the same way.
yeah,
So, yeah, I wholeheartedly support that message.
yeah, yeah.
Track your own stuff, understand what's normal,
Hmm.
document everything because especially if you're suffering from brain fog, you are not going to remember later. If you're like,
Yeah.
I'm making a mental note of how I respond to this on this day, that mental note is gone. Just write it down.
Yes, I know. Exactly. Just write it down. Write it down. I know. I know that actually reminds me I got to write something down after I put something in my calendar um for later this week while I'm thinking about it. But so oh my gosh, this has been such a fun conversation. What else should we talk about? Is there anything else that you want to talk about
Oh
related
man.
to this topic right now?
Um, I don't know. I mean, I I feel like my thoughts have been very disjointed. I apologize, but I really wanted to get across my enthusiasm for normalizing
Hmm.
menopause and perimenopause because even though it's more in the news now,
Hmm.
it feels kind of surfacey to me. Do you know what I mean? It feels like a
Oh
trend.
yeah.
Like there's this
Hmm.
horrible word called femtech that's happening right now.
Mm.
That's basically like devices that monitor issues that can be related to women's health. So they're branded as femtech, which is super gross. But I would love for deep, sustainable, systemic change in the way we approach talking about and experiencing perimenopause and menopause. And, you know, it's great that it's more in the news, but as I said, like, that's the first step. Like, what needs to happen is like a robust commitment from the scientific community and a shift in the way our society perceives women over the age of 35, even, I would say. And those are both things that, if we were farther along in the process, I think would just make it so much easier, because, as you say, there is no way to eliminate the discomforts of perimenopause, similar to how there's no way to eliminate the discomforts of puberty. But that's reality. Like, your body is not static. Like, it's always changing. And sometimes the changes are very dramatic. Sometimes they're slow. Sometimes they're quite fast. And, you know, menopause isn't this outlier. It's like any other stage of life. And the more we can normalize and commit to that and make it not a big deal, the easier it gets. You know, it's not only because you can reduce your emotional burden by sharing it with other people who can in turn share their burdens, then they are collectively less problematic, but also when you expect a thing to happen, and it's like, I'll compare it to pregnancy because that's the easiest one for me personally. And it's, no one goes into pregnancy thinking, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to have such a great time. Like, no matter how many stories your friends forward you on your email about how this woman in France had an orgasm when she was delivering, it's probably not going to happen for you. But no one goes into pregnancy genuinely expecting it to be a great time. But it is temporary. And I'm not going to say there's a ton of support for it, but socially, but there's more support for pregnancy socially than there is for menopause. And that societal support can make you perceive the symptoms as less troublesome, because you know other people experience them. You can just say it out loud to like a random person on the bus who's going to be like, hey, are you okay? Like, you just winced. You can be like, oh yeah, you know, the baby's kicking me. Or like, oh, I just, you know, I have to go to the bathroom all the time. And like, no one's going to be like, oh my God, what are you talking about? This is, you know, we can't hear about this. Like, I don't know what you're talking, like, how could you be getting cold flushes with, you know, perimenopause? Doesn't make any sense. So I think that normalizing it really does make it feel less awful, only because you are not surprised. You don't feel weird. You're not suffering from like a stigma, you know, like a stigma imposed on your physical condition. So yeah, that is very important to me. And frankly, I don't see it happening before I am well into the menopausal stage, but this is one small thing that I can do. And so, you know, we can only achieve so much, and it's really tempting to put a lot of pressure on ourselves and to imagine that because a problem exists, we're responsible for fixing it. But no single person is, no matter how responsible we might feel. So I've been trying quite hard in my own life to just do things that are meaningful, but not necessarily enormous.
Yes, I love that. That's that's great. And I think that's a great way to kind of wrap up our conversation, just everything that you just said. And yes, I actually, when I told someone recently what I did as a health and fitness coach, I said, yeah, I help with women, you know, I help them, you know, lose weight effortlessly, help them kind of navigate perimenopause, you know, understand their bodies better. And they said, oh yeah, that's totally trending right now.
Sad.
It took all I had
feel
in
sad
me
about that.
not to like really express how I was feeling inside.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, yeah. And I just kind of spin it to where like, yeah, it's so exciting that it's becoming more and more known, more and more talked about. And I'm just really excited to be on the forefront of this because it's just super important. But yes, I'm glad that you brought that up that, oh, women's health is trending right now. Like
Yeah,
it,
this new
it's
thing.
not like a fad, it's not like a crash diet or anything. It's actually a thing that happens. It just
Yes,
kind
and
of
has forever.
has and will forever
Like,
happen
yes, yes.
unless we in millions of years evolve into different beings and our bodies change completely. This is always how it's going to be. And also, I am really excited about the new research that's being done, and there's a lot more. This is just really like the tip of the iceberg. And I know you touched on this a little bit throughout our conversation, but there's still a lot we don't know. So I'm going through this women's coaching certification to do a really a much deeper dive into women's bodies. And it's so fascinating to me that, like, I just read a section on supplements, and it just says a lot of this is because of the FDA doesn't really, and you may know more about this than me because you mentioned that you have a background in pharmaceuticals. Is that what? Or
Reporting, pharmaceutical
rep-
reporting. So I
okay,
would say I can look at things and try to interpret what they mean in lay terms, but I definitely am not personally conducting research or,
okay,
anything like that.
okay. So, but what I read was like the FDA just, and I think I knew this on some level, that the FDA just doesn't treat supplements the same way they do like medications, where
Yes.
there could be a lot of unsafe supplements out there that we don't even know about. And it's the same thing with women's research is like there's a lot we don't know. So there's a lot in this textbook that they say, well, this is what we know. This is what recent research has told us. However, some of it is inconclusive and it could be a
Hmm.
little shady. There's some gray area. So there's still a lot we need to learn. But women's bodies are being studied more, and that's what I'm excited about.
Same. Yeah. No, I'm very excited. As much as I don't think that the news cycle will sustain this volume of
Mm-mm.
not just women's health, but women aging, it's not going to stay consistent, but I hope that it has planted seeds that will turn into roots that will eventually, you know, lead to a actual flourishing tree of knowledge about women's health issues. That would be amazing.
Yes, yes, yes. So cool. Well, let's just keep doing the work that we're doing, Adrienne. Keep writing your blog, and I'll keep doing what I'm doing. And together, as a community, as fellow perimenopausal into menopause women, we'll be riding this hormonal change, biological change together, and just kind of kick
Yeah.
ass and just not kind of give a fuck about what everyone else thinks.
Yes. No, we're in the fuck it era and
Yeah.
we're going to make it pretty great, I think.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yep.
It's late at night and I'm like, I really remember what enthusiasm felt like at 10 a.m. and now I'm really tired. And I'm like,
Yeah.
bedtime's on the horizon. Well, it's 8:20 here too, so I'm like
Oh.
approaching your like,
Oh
your
yes.
hour
Yes.
your hour before bed. So I'm
Yeah.
gonna practice
So
my good sleep hygiene and
yes.
screen free.
Yes. Yes. Definitely. So real quick, and I'll put in the link in the show notes. But where can people find you? Find your blog?
Yeah, it's the Hag Substack, and it should just be thathag.substack.com. But the
Okay.
name is just Hag. But it was actually too short. Just Hag was too few characters for Substack to start it.
Oh, really?
So yeah. So that's why I
That's
made it
funny.
That Hag. So it's thathag.substack.com. Yeah.
Okay.
So pretty easy to remember, one would hope.
Yeah. Well, I'll make sure it's in the YouTube description, Apple Podcast, Spotify. I'll make sure it's everywhere in my email to my community when this episode goes live. I'll make sure everyone knows how to find you. So, okay. Thank you, Adrienne. I'm so happy that we were able to have this conversation. And if you ever want to come back on and talk about something else, just let me know.
Oh,
I'm
thank
all ears.
you.
Yeah, I'd
Yes,
love to
such a
have you.
pleasure. Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. I appreciate it. So,
Yeah, of course.
yeah. And it was, I don't know, it's really cool what you do. So,
Oh, thank
thanks
you.
for having me on. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you for
All
coming
right.
on. The Wellness Abundance podcast is sponsored by Wellness Abundance Coaching. At Wellness Abundance Coaching, we help women create flexible nutrition and fitness plans that fit into their life to help them lose weight effortlessly and navigate the different hormonal seasons of their life with clarity, empowerment, and flexibility. We offer one-on-one and group health and fitness coaching. To learn more about how we can help you navigate the different seasons of your life and become the healthiest version of yourself, schedule a time to chat with us by visiting melissaking.net.